This episode of RadCast Outdoors is brought to you by PK Lures, Bow Spider, and High Mountain Seasonings.
Fish on! Hey, RadCast is on.
Hunting, fishing, and everything in between. This is RadCast Outdoors. Here are David Merrill and Patrick Edwards.
Hello, everyone out there. We are coming to you from the Bow Spider studio and Bow Spider's headquarters here in wonderful Wyoming. It's a great evening. It's been a wonderful summer day. I'm glad to be back on the air. So we have today a guest you all know. Yeah. Hi, Patrick.
Yeah, you might know me a little bit, but yeah, thanks for having me on, David.
Well, we actually have a little Q&A session today. We've pulled a question off the interwebs from the RadCast Nation. So if you're listening to this podcast and don't know what RadCast Nation is, it is a private Facebook group. We get on there and share tips and tricks and events. So, when you get done with this podcast, if you feel inclined, come on over and ask for an invite. And Patrick and I, we're admins, so keep it clean, keep it nice, and keep it friendly.
Yeah, it's kind of a fun group because you can talk about anything, hunting, fishing, and everything in between. And there's all kinds of different things that float around. And so we happen to have one that I know a little bit about today. So we're going to focus on it a little bit.
Yeah, so, we'll just get into it. As far as before we get into it, how's the wing?
The wing is doing a lot better.
Can you reel?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I went out and hammered some fish a couple of times here recently. The most recent was topwater largemouth bass. That was fun.
Good.
Got the Whopper Plopper, old Larry Dahlberg's creation, out there and hammered a few bass. That felt really good to do. And there's nothing better than watching a fish come up and smack a topwater. I don't care who you are. It's pretty fun to watch.
I was sitting over a water tank in the desert last week, and a bull elk came in, and it was pretty neat right at morning to watch the sun hitting the tips of his antlers, and my heart got going pretty good. I would concur that when you're pulling a dry fly across the top of the lake, man, and a trout explodes, I can concur that gets you going pretty good. But I don't know. There's something about 1,000-pound critter staring you at 14 yards away and doesn't know you're there. It's either's fine. It just depends on the day. So getting back on the old fishing, and we'll go right to it. This came from our, RadCast Nation, Outdoor Nation podcast Facebook group. The question comes from a Mr. J. Irvin. He's a member and a listener and a local guy here, and he asked specifically, how can a person fish PK spoons? And
yeah.
Who else better to tell us about PK spoons than old Patrick Edwards?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a fun thing to talk about. I have a long history with PK spoons, and it's just one of those really good questions. As soon as it was asked, I was like, wow, well, that's right up my alley because I've caught so many fish doing it and so many different species. I got excited and I told him we'll do it. So here we are doing
today.
it.
We're going to cover everything PK spoons, right? Mm-hmm. And everything jigging spoons, and we're not really going to go species specific on type of fish, but just more how to fish, those spoons. I think, what would we call it? Liquid water and hard water?
Yeah, there's a few different ways to go. So we'll get into that, but
PK Lures is, you have that long history. So
Sure.
Give us some back history on PK.
Yeah, so PK has been around a long time. Pat O'Grady, if you aren't familiar, go back to episode 4, I believe it is. We had Pat O'Grady on. And he talked about just the history of PK Lures, but I came on really when it started to take off in 2009. And what he needed was to get the website going, get the business going, and I had some skills and expertise in that area, so I was helping him with that.
That sounds very familiar, Patrick.
Yeah, it might be similar with Bow Spider, right?
Yes.
So I helped him out with that, but probably one of the cooler parts of my job was being able to take prototypes and test and go out and fish with Pat. Pat's an amazing fisherman, and anybody that's ever fished with him will concur that guy can put fish on the line, bring them in, just about as good as anybody in the industry. So I spent a lot of time watching Pat and how he fished. And then, of course, I went out and did my own experimentation, I guess you could say, with the different lures and different presentations. And I like the question because I was trying to think of how you could ineffectively fish spoons. And I mean, because jigging spoons and spoons in general can be used about 100 different ways. And so we'll talk about the main ones, but really it's one of the most effective lures ever made. The PK spoon in particular and the flutterfish. In Fisherman a few years ago, they did an article and they were talking about the top jigging spoons of all time, and the PK flutterfish and the PK spoon made the top 10. So you can't really go wrong with that when In Fisherman is talking about how great
top 10 lures of all time. And you got to see that company, you helped build their first website, got to go out and, basically R&D and test some of these very first products. And now you kind of get to see, kind of the full life cycle of a company from birth to transition sale, right? And still see it continue to grow. So that's got to be kind of a notch, on your belt or a feather in your cap, right?
It's just fun. I enjoy being a part of, anything that grows and becomes successful. I mean, it's just about seeing the product do well. It's kind of like with bow spider or with the PK flutterfish. Either way, it's one of those things, once you use it or you see the application of it, and right away, this is a winner.
And I brought bow spider to you when it was, I didn't have a website. So you knew about it before pretty much anybody.
You were prototyping it. And, Pat, he's still every once in a while say, hey, why don't you try this out, and take it out to Boyce and see how it does, try it for this species, that species. And I think that's part of the fun for me about this.
How does he receive it when you give him a report like, hey, yeah, Pat, that one just didn't do well, or the other way when you're like, hey man, can I get some of these from my tackle box?
He's so even keeled about it, like it doesn't really faze him. I'll say, hey, I didn't like this about it, or I like this about it. And he's like, okay, cool. And he's always tweaking. That guy, he's always taking something and working with it to try to make it the best possible thing it could be. So he's really good at taking the feedback.
And definitely as an entrepreneur, that data, that feedback, that information, it's neither good or bad. It's information. It's what you do with it, right? But the more, because I definitely have some product testers, we'll call them, right? That, their opinion, I really do rely on that. If they give me the Siskel and Ebert 2 thumbs up, we're going forward to market and we're going to spend money. But if they, don't, I want to know why, and then we can go back and do some adjustments. So, well, let's get into it. What is a jigging spoon?
So it's kind of funny, jigging spoons aren't anything special. They can be, if you look at some of the older jigging spoons that came out in the market, they were basically a rectangular piece of lead with a little bit of paint on it and a hook. I mean, they're nothing really special. And if you look at, saltwater applications nowadays, PK has a product for that. It's called the Panic. And what it is basically just a long piece of metal, and it's got a hook on it, and you drop it down and a fish looks at it and it looks like something that's wounded.
Well, effectively, you look at bait fish, they're swimming horizontally, right?
Sometimes.
Most of the time in a big ball, right? But when a predator comes in and whether that's a bird or a fish or whatever and hits that bait ball, they stun some of those fish, and some of those fish that don't get eaten start swimming very erratically in weird directions and orientations, and usually by themselves. And, that's when you get some of those outlier predatory fish to come in and get interested in, hey, what happened here?
And in freshwater, you'll have emerald shiners that die off when the oxygen levels change. And so they'll kind of lay over on their side and kind of flitter up in the water column and then fall back down. That's a good indicator for predatory fish that there's an easy meal. And basically all a jigging spoon is it's kind of replicating that in one form or another. And
awesome. I didn't know that.
Yeah. And I say that because there's a lot of different ways this can manifest itself. So a jigging spoon can be used a ton of different ways. You can jig it for sure, but you control it. I mean, you can cast it and retrieve it.
Can you dead stick it? Just let it hang there?
I've caught ice fishing doing that all the time. You can have like a PK spoon down in the hole, dead sticking it, something will cruise by and grab it. And they come in all kinds of different shapes and sizes. So
it's kind of hard to list exactly what styles spoons are on the market.
I can give you some of the best ones. Like you have flat and light spoons. So like a needle fish. I don't know if you've ever seen those. You have oval style ones. You have peanut style ones. You have ones that are heavy on one side and not on the other, so that they have some crazy side-to-side action, which the PK spoon is one of those. You have some that are slightly curved, extreme curved, all kinds of different variations. Some of them have rattle chambers nowadays. Some have clackers that bang against the side. I mean,
so most of it is just to change the presentation to more mimic whatever is in the water column to eat.
There's that, and there's also the mood of the fish. And so the mood of the fish is a critical piece. If you have fish that are super lethargic, you can use a fast action spoon like a PK spoon and they may not even look at it. Whereas if you're using a flutter fish that falls really slowly, they may just hammer the snot out of it. So
something maybe a little less erratic.
Yep.
Versus if the fish are active, they want that erratic motion.
Yeah. So you really have to figure out what the fish is looking for and kind of what the bait is doing as well.
Because if the bait's lethargic and you're out there using an erratic bait, you may not get, if the fish and the bait are lethargic, and you're mimicking a non-lethargic bait, they don't have the energy and they're like, yeah, it's too fast.
Now there is a caveat to that, because if the fish are kind of full, say the walleye are in there feeding on emerald shiners and they're kind of full, you can have a slow presentation and they won't even go for it because they've already got food stuffed into their gullet.
Well, think about Thanksgiving after your third meal and dessert, and some aunt walks by with, hey, there's one more piece of pie, and you look at it and you're like, meh. 2 weeks before, I'd snatch that up in a second. Right then, it's like, no, thank you.
Well, but one of the things that you can do is you can use the predatory nature of the fish against them. So they could be full, and you could twitch that spoon by them, and they grab it just because it twitched by their face, and that instinct kicks in, and they go for it. So sometimes you go against that rule of thumb, and you have to kind of break outside of your box and be like, okay, I'm going to twitch this really fast. And that's worked for me before, where I'm fishing in an area where there's literally hundreds of thousands of emerald shiners. And if you twitch and work that lure quickly, gets those rainbow trout or those walleye or whatever it is, those predators just to come and smack it.
Well, I know with like retrieving spinners, like I've got a lot of experience, blue foxes, right?
Yep.
If you just cast that out and just give it a straight, boring retrieve, depending on the mood of the fish, that can be very effective. But a lot of times if you give it just a little bit of some erratic, right? Move the rod tip left and right, change your pace of reeling a little bit, and just change the presentation of that spinner instead of just being a constant slow or even medium or fast, but just a constant one direction, one pace. That'll trigger that predatory instinct in that fish, and they'll bite.
Yeah. Probably my favorite jigging spoon fishing moment of my life was catching a tiger muskie on one. And PK, they had a 1.5 ounce flutter fish, and it was fire tiger. And Pat had put some like bucktail on the treble on the back. And I was going to Utah, and I said, hey, you got anything you want me to try? And he said, yeah, take one of these with you. And of course, he gave me like 6. But anyway, he said, take one of these with you. And I saw that one. I was like, man, that is the perfect color for where I'm going. I'm going to try that. And there was a weed bed, and it was a pretty good size weed bed. And so I kind of took the boat and kind of went off of that weed bed a little ways. And Danny Kurtula, who's been on the show, he was with me. And I threw off the outside edge of that weed bed. It's kind of deep. Let that flutter fish just kind of flutter down. And I snapped it a couple of times, and then I saw this big shadow come up behind it. And I got really excited and popped it one more time. And he just, in an instant, just was there and ate that thing. And ended up catching 3 tiger muskies on that particular spoon.
Shout out to Danny.
Yeah.
He loves those, and I know he's going to be listening. So,
but I'll tell you what, man, that catching muskies and seeing them come, because the water was fairly clear, and seeing them come up and smack that spoon, that was something else, man. That was really, really cool to watch.
We've talked about that several times on several podcasts, that my favorite fishing is definitely topwater.
Yep. And this presentation that I was doing, I was casting it out, and I would let it fall next to the weed bed. I would rip it up just with my rod tip. I'd snap my rod tip really hard, and I was using a heavy action rod. Snap it really hard. That lure would jump up a couple of feet in the water column and flutter down. And I'd snap that rod and it'd come up again. It's just so much fun when you can see them come up and hit it. And that is one of the best ways to present jigging spoons, is actually to cast them, let them sink, rip them, let them sink, and rip them. And I saw Pat O'Grady. He put on a clinic one day. We went out near Cheyenne. There was a little body of water. I had no idea there were lake trout in it. He did. He had like this 1 ounce nickel flutterfish, casts it way out there. And I'm thinking, what is he doing? And within about 2 minutes, he had this really nice, like 7-8 pound lake trout on. Took him a while, got it in. And I was like, and that's all he was doing. He was just letting it fall in the water column, rip, fall, rip, and fall. Works really well for all kinds of stuff.
So what makes the jigging spoon such a hot commodity is for fishermen?
I think it's the versatility, man. I mean, you can literally fish it just about any way that you want to, and any season too. I've caught fish every time of year. I would say summer, I don't do it as much because there's other presentations that are a little more effective in the summer. But other than that, it's hard to beat them. I always have jigging spoons on me when I'm fishing. And, depending on what species you're after, like I would say walleye, sauger, and trout are extremely, extremely susceptible to going for a jigging spoon.
What seasons if you were targeting those 3 species with a jigging spoon, would you say is the best?
I would say for sure the late fall into winter, and then the late winter into spring. Those are the best times to use a jigging spoon. On
and off the ice then, but
yes.
But right around break up and right around freeze.
Yeah, so for Wyoming, I would say Wyoming, the Dakotas, this kind of area, Montana, you're probably looking at October, November, December, and then picking that up again February, March, April.
But it still will work all year round.
Absolutely.
And depending on species, like you said, a weed bed or dead sticking or side of a lake or trolling. Just, oh man, it's not just that one place in that one.
Yeah. It's an incredible, it's an incredible creation. A lot of people think that you just have to hang it over the side of the boat, jig it straight up and down, or put a hole in the ice and jig it straight up and down. But there's so much more that you can do than that.
We've talked about all these styles of jigging spoons, but what helps you narrow down the decision to, I'm going to pick this spoon today? Yeah. What are the features you're looking for?
Well, one of the biggest things is, what are they eating? So I have some favorite colors and I have some favorite spoons. I look a lot at what are they eating? If they're eating emerald shiners that are dying, I'm using a flutterfish, period. Like, I'm not going to mess with anything else probably. If they are eating crawfish, there's a crawfish PK spoon that looks just like a crawdad as far as, the pink color. Those fish will hammer it. We were catching sauger on it this winter. And I mean, it's an incredible presentation that you can do. If I'm going after finicky panfish like crappie or bluegill or perch or something like that, that little tungsten predator that they make is a killer.
Thing is tiny for what is it?
Tiny.
It's only a quarter ounce.
It's way less than that. It's like a 16th ounce.
It's 16 ounce, but it's
yeah.
But because that's the one I fished with you a little bit,
mm-hmm.
and usually you get that tiny of a jig. I mean, you're limited to like 20 feet casting because it's so light, but for the size. But that one's heavy enough. You can actually cast that thing out there, and so you can get into that little bit deeper water or those places that are harder to reach for some of the fishermen that for the same size lure, right? So you can get to some of those fish that maybe are less whatever.
And tungsten has kind of taken the fishing world by storm over the last few years. I know you like to fly fish. I mean, there's tungsten bead-headed, flies and different things like that, but there's a lot of ice fishing.
We saw tungsten take over the waterfowling shot shells there because it retains more energy. It's heavy. It's heavy lead. It tungsten.
Packs a punch, right? And same with fishing. I mean, you can have an extremely small lure that still weighs quite a bit. It weighs a lot more than lead. It's extremely hard. It's durable.
It's a good material, stuff. But it's expensive.
Boy, it's expensive.
like 10x the price of lead. Yeah, so when you start looking at the price of a tungsten lure versus a lead lure of the same size, right?
Yep.
Now, if they're the same weight, the tungsten's going to be half the size, which is benefit that we just talked about that.
Yeah, especially if the fish are wanting something smaller. But I mean, you really have three main materials that you're dealing with. You have lead spoons, you have zinc spoons, and you have tungsten spoons. Pretty much that covers all of them. I would say tungsten is probably the hot commodity right now. But in general, most of your spoons are some combination of that, right? I know PK, it's pretty much zinc and tungsten. There are a lot of brands out there that are mostly lead. And I mean, it doesn't make them bad. It's just they're different.
It's going to make a different price point too. So
and it's a little different presentation because of how they fall.
So if you have to pick some go-to colors, because obviously they come in every color under the rainbow. Let's just say 3 colors that would be your go-to colors of any water, any species, any day. What color would you have in that box?
Man, Kurt at PK is going to kill me because these are going to sell out probably. Now I'm going to say all these, but I would say my top 3 for Wyoming and pretty much anywhere I would go, for sure, number 1 is the red dot glow. Not even questionable about that one. I mean, that lure I've caught so many fish on, it's ridiculous. So the red dot glow is definitely number 1. I would say right behind that, you're probably looking at like a fire tiger glow. Fire tiger is a great color. It's hard to beat. And then I'll pick one of the metallic ones because you could pick between copper, nickel, and gold. I would say gold I would pick.
But any of the metallics.
Yeah, any of them are good. I mean, I caught my biggest yellow perch, a 15-inch yellow perch out of Glendo on a 1/2 ounce nickel flutterfish one time. I was fishing for walleye, but hey, I'll take it.
Okay. So that gives me an idea of, if I'm going to first start in this and go look, because I mean, as a new fisherman, you go walk up and down the aisles and you've got 7, and go into Rocky Mountain Discount Sports right here in town and go look at their lure selection. And, when you're paying $5 to $9 a lure, you don't want to be buying a ton of these, and you don't want to be losing a ton of them either.
Well, and if you're a trout person, get the pink glow. Man, that one is a killer around here for trout.
So with jigging spoons, is there a better time during the day? Not that we're not going to specify a season, but is there a better time during the day to be jigging versus anything else?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a seasonal thing too, but I would say in general, rule of thumb, I like to fish the early hours of the day. So just as the sun's coming up and as the sun's going down. Of course, again, I'm mainly targeting walleye, so that's part of the reason.
Well, similar to hunting though. I mean, you can still scare one up at lunchtime, but,
for sure.
But you better be out there the first part of the day, and you better be out there till you can't see anymore. And that's where those glows come in, because I know we were charging them up with flashlights and pitching them back out there. Oh, well, night. Don't. So no. Maybe you guys don't want to charge your glows up at night and go fish them. I wouldn't recommend it. I mean, just go home and wait till it's noon and hot again.
Oh man, yeah. You can fish them at night. You can fish them during the middle of the day.
I've had more fun, Patrick, with a headlight and charging those up because those predatory fish sometimes are nocturnal, and guess what they're doing? They're hitting that stuff that at noon you can cast your arm off and not get a bite, and you go back out there at even 8 p.m. when it's just getting a little dark, and
especially burbot. As we learned this last year. But yeah, I would say you're probably looking at those first couple hours. I mean, typically if it's kind of more the, late spring, early fall, I'll fish till 10 o'clock doing jigging. But after that, I kind of put them away, go to something else. But
I find it interesting because, I've told you, I like to do the water sports a little bit. Right. And so a couple of weeks ago, we took a few people out on the boat, and they wanted to kind of lay around and be lazy and get out on the lake at 1 or 2 in the afternoon when it's hot, which you would think that's when you want to go do water sports activities, right? Well, for a guy that likes to slalom ski, no, I want that glass smooth water. So from 7 to about 8:15, that's when David wants to be on the lake. The rest of the day, YouTubers can have it. You fishermen can have it. I'll come back tomorrow. So if you're out there trolling and you're enjoying your night, and here comes David ripping by in his powerboat slalom skiing, don't shoot me, please.
I'll just give you the same warning I give all of them. Don't get too close because you'll regret it.
So what fish have you caught on a spoon?
Oh my gosh. well, I guess it's probably easier to say what I haven't caught, but I was thinking about that. I'm like, gosh, a little bit of everything. So walleye, sauger, northern pike, largemouth bass, smallmouth bass, white bass, bluegills, green sunfish, black and white crappie, perch, rainbow trout, brown trout, kokanee salmon, brookies, cutthroat, splake, tiger trout, lake trout, tiger muskie, grayling, whitefish, suckers, carp, pretty much everything. And I should have put channel catfish in there too. You can literally catch anything on these things.
Channel cat surprised me on that list.
Oh, channel cat, man. I will tell you, Pat O'Grady is a legend for catching huge channel cats out of Glendale Reservoir through the ice on spoons. That's the first time I'd ever seen that, and it's crazy.
I don't want to pry too much, but I'm imagining you're fishing that spoon pretty close to the bottom then?
Fishing down close to the bottom, and that crawfish color. Yep. It's a killer, man. I'm telling you, that is another one that, if you have a body of water with a bunch of crawfish in it and you don't have a crawfish PK spoon, you're screwing up. I mean, you really should have one.
So for everybody out there listening, check your bodies of water. If they have crawfish, you should be fishing a crawfish lure.
And I mean, you should have some for sure. A lot of people are like, well, I don't know that all the fish eat it. Yeah, trust me, they do. I mean, I've had yellow perch that are full of them that I've caught. Burbot, love them. Oh,
I love them too.
Oh, so
do you know who else loves them?
Who's that?
My buddy Jim Zumbo.
Yeah, Jim likes them a lot. He catches them all the time.
Mud bugs are the closest you get to Dungeness crab.
They're really good. And then walleye devour those things, and trout too. I mean, if you would be amazed at how many trout you can catch on a Rebel crawdad, that old little crankbait that you can buy at the store for like $4, you will catch trout, walleye, all kinds of stuff on that too.
So is one of the best ways to figure out what you should use is after you catch a fish, figure out what it's eating? Oh,
yeah. I mean, I always check the stomach. I always say you're not a real fisherman until you check the stomach contents of a fish. I mean, you really need to know what they're eating and kind of get an idea of what you might ought to be throwing. It makes a big difference for sure.
So, I mean, I've done it once or twice on more of your trout species and found they're just chocked full of either mosquitoes or this fly or that, right? And I switched to that fly pattern because I worked really hard to get that first one. You don't work very hard anymore because they're just all of a sudden, if they're chocked full of that and you can mimic that food source, it's a no-brainer.
I'm going to tell you a story that's going to blow your mind.
Ready.
So my buddy Seth, he's listening to this, I'm sure. He lives up in Idaho.
Hi, Seth.
Yeah, he caught this brook trout and he sent me... I couldn't believe it. He sent me this photo and he said, look at how many crappie are in the stomach of this brook trout. Now, brook trout are greedy. I will tell you that. They are greedy fish. He sends me this picture. There was something like 30 of these little tiny, they look like, I don't know, like quarter-sized or $50 sized crappie that were in this little brook trout. I mean, I don't remember how big it was, Seth. You'll have to tell me later, but it wasn't a huge brook trout.
It wasn't 24-inch, but it wasn't a 6-inch. It was a brook trout.
It was a brook trout.
It was a nice one.
It had hammered those things. And so it's like, man, they are greedy little stinkers. They'll eat anything they can fit in their mouths.
I'll tell you about a story about Little Hunter on his one of his first trips back up to Alaska. We were mostly, flossing for sockeye salmon, but just to keep him entertained, I threw a dollop of eggs on because I knew what was going to happen. Is those trout they gorge themselves on eggs to the point of he finally caught this trout about the 10th time I baited him up, right? You could just, at the end of the drift, if you just kind of dead drift that eggs, you'll just feel fish just kind of pecking at it, right? Mm-hmm. And we put a lot smaller size hook on than what we'd floss for. And he finally caught that trout. It was puking eggs when we took it out. I mean, it was so full of eggs, it could not fit another one in its mouth, yet it was sitting there eating his bait. That blows me away we're talking a cup of eggs in 8-inch, 10-inch trout.
Oh, and I'll tell you what, in the fall, you'll catch rainbow trout and walleye around here that have been eating emerald shiners, and they will literally throw up all over you when you pull them out of the water. I had this 30-inch walleye that I caught. It was the very first 30-inch walleye I'd ever caught. Picked him up out of the water, and he threw up like 4 or 5 crappie that were like 3 inches long.
That's bait.
Yeah. I was like, holy cow. And then, went and put him back in. I caught another fish a little while later, and it was like a mid 20-inch walleye, and it did the same thing. I mean, there were crappie up in there feeding, and the walleye were feeding on the crappie.
So to pretty much a standard rig on a spoon, just for somebody who's rigging one up the first time, what else, how are you going to tie from the reel to the jig? What's in between?
Yeah, that's a good question. So this one's a little bit tricky. So we're going to get into the details a little bit here. So it really depends on what you're doing. If you're fishing for, let's say you're ice fishing. Okay, you're going to want to use lighter line, probably a monofilament. Depending
Why is it lighter line during ice fishing?
Well, the water tends to be pretty clear, and you don't want the fish to see your line. That's one of the biggest things. But
I've heard that lots is lighter line during clear ice, or during ice, and I just always wondered why.
And there are people that use fluorocarbon and lines that are a little bit harder to see. But one of the things that I do is between the lure and I go up about 1.5 feet, 2 feet, I'll put a swivel up higher.
So 16 inches above.
Yeah.
Above. And so are you tying directly to the jig with the line and then just putting a swivel midline?
So what I do...
Or are you using a snap swivel?
So what I'll do, I don't use a snap swivel. What I do is I put a snap to the lure itself, tie to the snap, and then I go up, 15, 18 inches, something like that, and put the swivel there. And then that helps reduce your line twist, obviously, because you don't want your line
you're using just
up.
A barrel swivel 16 inches up, and you're using just the snap portion off the swivel, or you could just buy individual snaps.
Yep. And so I have that attached. What happens with the snap? So if you've ever had a snap swivel, you'll notice that most of them have the kind of snap that kind of has a kink in, it's almost kind of diagonal, and then you got the really hard bend. So the lure, when it's hooked on that, it doesn't have as much action when you're vertically jigging. So I go with like a dual lock snap. That way it has
more of a figure 8 snap.
Yeah, it has a rounded edge so that lure can really pivot and have a lot of action to it.
So if I'm picturing this correct, some of those snaps kind of have a triangle to the top of them where they snap through the eye of the swivel, and that triangle keeps the lure centered in the swivel, but it reduces how much action versus if you have that full radius, that 180
circle.
Radius circle. And so if you get the figure 8 snaps, they have that full radius.
Yeah, you don't want, in my opinion, I have more success where I have a little bit more play in that lure, and I want it to be able to have a lot more action, be more erratic. And so that's how I'll tie up for a vertical presentation. Now, if I'm snap jigging, which is a very aggressive type presentation, I don't rig that way. I rig with heavier line, and I'm tying again to a snap, same kind of thing. I want it to have that action. And
swivel still or no?
Yep,
swivel?
You can still go with the swivel, but you really got to pay attention when you're snap jigging. And the reason I say that is Al Linder actually talked about this on his show. You can lose a lot of fish snap jigging spoons because if you have braid and you are snapping that thing, there's no giving that line at all. Mm-hmm. And so if you hook a fish, you can tear it, especially trout. They have a really soft mouth.
Tear it
right out of their mouth, and you'll lose lots of fish. You'll get a lot of hits, but you won't land many of them. And so like this spring when I was doing it, I had 8-pound monofilament, which is about as high as I go around here. We don't have a whole lot that is going to make me worry, but I was using 8-pound monofilament, so it has some of that stretch to it. And I was using that catching 20 to 24 inch rainbow trout out on Boysen. And I was snap jigging the new rattle spoon that PK makes. And man, it was killer. It was a lot of fun. But in general, that's how I rig them, just so that you don't get a lot of line twist. And you want to have as much action in that lure as you possibly can.
So, I mean, just to go back on this, I don't think there's a right or wrong way to rig one of these, right? I think there's more justification for going from this line weight to that line weight, going from, just from my experience from the Kenai, you can floss with a 12-inch leader and weight, or you can go to an 80-inch leader and weight. But somewhere in between those two is kind of the happy medium, the Goldilocks zone, right? You go 80 inches, you're going to snag every fish out there because you feel the fish on the weight. Well, 80 inches away is the hook, and you start trying to set that hook. Well, it's setting 3 fish away, right? Mm-hmm. Same thing if you run like a 12-inch leader, but you're just decreasing the amount of fishable water you're using, right? So, and I think about there in Alaska, a lot of times we'd run braid, but then we'd run like 30 feet of mono as kind of a tippet. So you had that stretch, but then you could get into the braid. And the cool thing with braid, kind of running it as backing, quote unquote, like I think of fly fishing, because I've got, 60 feet or, I think 30 yards or whatever of floating line, and then you go to a braid, right? Because if you just went with floating line, like on my fly reel, I'm not going to get a whole lot of line on that reel. It's going to spool up and be full by switching between the two, right? But definitely you go to that braid. I mean, that's 100%. There's no give to that fish, and you can break them and lose them. And so,
yeah, braid is a really great line. I use it for a lot of applications. However, I don't use it for snap jigging. I mean, if you're going to do it with snap jigging, you're going to lose a lot of fish. And that's some of the just pro tips that you can learn over time. Al brought that up, and I had been doing it wrong years ago. And I'm like, oh, well, that makes sense. Now I know why I ripped through so many fish, because I like the feel of braid. You can feel everything. If the fish is even close to it, you can feel it. But I'll tell you what, man, the monofilament for that is really good. You can also do like what you were saying. You can have, a uni knot, and you can put like 5 or 6 feet of either a heavier mono, or you can put a fluorocarbon leader on with a uni knot. That works fine. But again, it's a lot of it has to do with what is your presentation going to be. If it's going to be a violent snapping of the rod, you don't want to use braid.
And you can also play with your drag tension from mono to braid and get, sure. If you're using strictly mono, you can go with a tighter drag because you've got some stretch in that line, right? If you're using strictly braid, you better lighten that drag up because you're going to have those issues we talked about. You're solidly connected to that fish. So just justify how you're rigging it. And if it's not working, change it and ask, right?
Yeah, if your drag's not set right, you're going to break your own heart. And any fisherman that has enough experience knows what I'm talking about.
So if I'm bass fishing, down south, or let's say I'm muskie fishing up north, or I'm trout fishing somewhere here in the central states, what would you say for the jigging spoon? Just kind of wrap this up, and what's the overall thought there because that's 3 different types of water, 3 different distinct regions, right?
Yeah, jigging spoons have their place. That's what I would say. So back in, I think it was 2010, there were some folks down at Lake Fork, Texas, and they were big bass fishermen, and they were fishing in the springtime, and they got a hold of some of our flutterfish, some of the 1/2 ounce nickel flutterfish, and they were killing these huge bass, 10-pound plus bass on the jigging spoon. And it is an application you can literally use anywhere in the United States. And for just about any species, they will hit it. I don't care if you're pickerel fishing in the Northeast or if you're tarpon fishing, you can catch them on these. I mean, think about tarpon. They're going to hit something like that. But I mean, jigging spoons have their place just anywhere that you go. If you were to go down to the Amazon and use jigging spoons, you're going to catch fish. You can use them anywhere. And I do want to talk about a couple other presentations too, because I think, oftentimes we do get stuck in that rut of we're just vertically jigging through the ice, because ice fishermen, they use spoons all the time. The Swedish pimple was one of the big ones back in the day, the Acme Castmaster, the PK spoons, but there's so much more you can do. One of the things that I've noticed is like down at the gorge, one of the things you can do for kokanee salmon is you can vertically jig them, but you can also put spoons down on downriggers and troll them and catch kokanee as well, or
interesting, because I've always used just a buzz bomb and corn for kokanee.
Yeah, I mean, you can do a lot of different things for kokanee. In fact, vertically jigging with jigging spoons right now for kokanee, you can smack the snot out of them. I mean, they are a really great presentation, and we've used that in the past. But trolling them with a dipsy diver using downriggers.
Are you still, when you're trolling them, are you still going to have that 16 inches of leader between the swivel and the snap? Or are you going to, because a lot of times, like when I'm running a blue fox, I just go from my main line to a swivel to the lure. Yeah. Just to make it easy to change from one to the next to the next. I
recommend that people have some kind of swivel system somewhere. You can buy the snap swivel that has the lock, the dual lock snap. And so that's what I would recommend. You can use that to troll it behind the boat. There are a lot of times on Boysen, David, where you can throw it back 100, 150 feet and just troll and catch big rainbows all day long. Troll about 2.5 miles an hour. You're going to catch fish. And so again, you can cast them from shore and snap them back. You can straight retrieve them back. You can do all kinds of different things with spoons. So I hope that people listening to this will realize that a jigging spoon is not just a jigging spoon. You don't just jig it.
Don't just drill a hole in the ice and just go up and down.
I mean, if you're ice fishing, then you're kind of stuck with that. But on the rest of the year, I mean, you can go to streams. You can go to rivers and cast them and retrieve them. I mean, there are so many different ways you can fish them.
The second you get a leading edge on that ice, right, you can either get in a boat or get on the shore and kind of fish perpendicular to that edge, and then you can snap jig them or even troll them, right, if the ice is half off the lake.
Absolutely. So. And you can tip them with things. I mean, that's a very common thing in the summertime. A lot of people tip them with half of a crawler or a whole crawler. You can tip them with minnow heads, full minnow if you want to.
Now, when you say tip them, what do you mean by that?
So basically running bait off of the treble hook behind it. So I'll tell you a story. This has been 10 years ago probably. I went fishing and I went with Danny, and we went after cutthroat trout, and it was really windy, kind of nasty weather, and we had some glow spoons, and I put a full 3-inch gulp off the back of one of the PK spoons, the red dot glow.
So a full 3-inch minnow.
Yep. Threw it way out there because it was like a half-ounce lure, so I could cast it really far. I let it sink, and then I reeled it back really slowly. And what was cool is it transferred the action of the spoon to that gulp minnow. So that gulp minnow was twitching back and forth.
Just like a real slow Jaws shark fishing back, right?
It was... It was killer, man. I mean, we caught a bunch of really nice Yellowstone cuts with those. So
I'm kind of reminded of that girl that's swimming on top of the water in Jaws, and here comes the fish.
And you know what was crazy about that trip is that the average cutthroat that we were catching that day was like 19 inches.
Average.
So much fun. So much fun. And light line too. We were fishing like 5-6
There definitely is an evolution of hunters and fishers from... when you first go out, you just want to catch a fish, right? Then you go out and you just want to catch a lot of fish. Then you go out and you want to catch a lot of big fish. And then you go out and you just want to catch the biggest fish, right? You can, and there's that progression we all go through it. I can remember being a little kid, and I've seen it with waterfowlers. I've seen it with, bear hunters and elk hunters, and it doesn't matter. There's this progression from, I just want to get one, to now I want to get a lot, to now I want to get a lot of big ones, and then it's finally, no, I just want to get, if the average rainbow or brook trout in that reservoir's 19, right, you want to catch the 24.
Yeah. Speaking of which, just the other day in the mail, found out that with that trip that you and I took for brookies, I won the region for the catch and release on that fish. So that was kind of cool.
That's really cool. We got pictures of that. You'll have to share that out.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. So
that was only like a week and a half ago last year. We might need to make a day up here and go.
I want to go bad.
Because archery season's starting, and once that opens, David's got priority straight.
Yeah. And so I have one other thing I'm going to say, but we do need to talk about our sponsors. So, if you're looking to put fish, like say you want to catch a bunch of trout and you want to smoke them, you better look at High Mountain Seasonings. They have some of the best fish brines out there, and it is hunting season. So David, I'm sure you're stocking up on High Mountain so that you can make some jerky.
You need a little pork suet. If you know somebody named Patrick, you can get some. David might have a pig somewhere too. But with some fresh venison, and if you're into it, some pork suet or some beef suet, and some High Mountain seasoning, you can make so many different variety meals and treats, meat snacks of a variety that will keep you entertained and busy. And the cool part is, you go to the beef jerky aisle in the store, you're pretty regulated to, whatever's on the shelf, and it's pretty pricey, and it's chocked full of all these other preservatives that are, now I'm not saying that there isn't stuff in high mountains, but there's a level of satisfaction when you take pork suet from your own pig, and you take some burger from an antelope doe or a mule deer doe or your elk that you got, and you mix that together, you follow the instructions, you either jerky shoot it or whatever you're going to make, right? We make meatballs, we make all kinds of stuff. And just to put that on the table, the satisfaction of knowing where all those ingredients come from, having your hand in that whole process, it's just like, I really do like some smoked trout and smoked fish. One of my favorite recipes, it's pretty easy. You take 8 ounces of cream cheese, you take usually a pound of smoked salmon, and you can add some onions and some chives. Or you can just take the cream cheese and just the smoked salmon. This will work for trout. And you just flake up the trout, put it in a bowl. You just let the cream cheese sit out at room temperature, and you just mix it up with a fork or a spoon and put some Ritz crackers out. It's way too easy, and it's way too good.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So High Mountain Seasonings, where does everybody need to go?
HIMTNjerky.com.
So High Mountain.
Yep. HIMTNjerky.com. You can get everything you need for your fishing, your hunting, any of that kind of stuff. Hey, even if you're like David and I, you're going to process some pigs, make some bacon or some ham.
Even if you just want to go to the store, and I would cringe at doing this, but it can be done. People do it. You could go to the freezer and buy pre-packaged hamburger, and they've got some nice seasoning to go on top of your hamburgers. So
yes, they do. They have good stuff. And then, of course, Bow Spider. We need to talk about that a little bit. You guys are hopping like crazy.
We are there again. We talked about this last time this year during season. Yeah, we are knee deep in the muck trying to get your orders out. So do me a favor and get your order in yesterday, and be patient with us. We still are a made in USA small mom and pop company, and we really do work our tails off to get those orders out to you.
Yep. So great product. Go to bowspider.com. Check your local retail shops. If they don't have them, ask for them, and tell them, hey, the RadCast guys said you need bow spiders in your shop.
Bowspider.com is the website. Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Bow Spider. We did launch the feature-length hunting film, so if you're got an itch for that, go check that out. But yeah, thank you to everybody that's got a Bow Spider so far, and we're growing and expanding rapidly, which is exciting.
Yeah. So the last thing I wanted to talk about is in regards to jigging spoons, and this is something that all of you need to learn before your ice fishing season. If you don't have a sonar of some kind to look at what the fish are doing in relation to your lure when you're using jigging spoons, you're messing up. And I'm just saying you will catch a lot more fish if you have something. So I use a Garmin, and I can look and see what the fish are doing. You can use any kind of flasher you want. But it is really helpful to be able to see as you present that jigging spoon, whether you're moving it slowly or ripping it fast, because sometimes under the ice, ripping it fast works. But it's really important to be able to see what is that fish doing in relation to how you're presenting that lure.
Well, a lot of times you and I, because we used those when we were out there ice fishing, and what's really cool for people who's never used one is there's kind of 2 bars on that finder, right? One is the fish, and then the other one you can see going up and down is your jig. And you can kind of see as you're giving that jig different presentations. If you're going fast and the fish sometimes just completely sits there, then all of a sudden you stop, pause, or then go really slow. Or maybe it's a big rip, right? It doesn't matter what it is, but you can figure out the presentation that starts to get that fish to move up. And that's kind of like a video game to me. Fun. Watching that is really fun to figure out, oh, the line's getting closer to my line. Oh. So.
And there's a couple of different examples I'll give you. So a few times fishing lake trout, one of the things that you'll do is you'll start down low on the bottom and you'll see them coming. And typically as you start to raise that lure, that fish will follow you up. If you try to pull it away from that fish pretty quickly. Typically they'll come up and they'll hammer it, so that's one. Then another one that I had this last year, it was kind of entertaining. I had this sauger that was watching my jigging spoon. And so I would jig it up and he would kind of come up and look at it for a second. And then I would jiggle it in his face and then he'd kind of go back down.
He'd disappear right back into the bottom and he's gone.
Because sometimes you have to jiggle it in their face, like walleye and sauger. Typically, you kind of jiggle it in their face.
And if they're close enough to the bottom, the sonar doesn't differentiate them between a fish. It's when they rise just a little bit off the bottom that the sonar picks them up.
So it was kind of fun. The sun was coming up. It was prime time to catch them. And I was like, man, I got to figure out a way to get this guy to bite. So I took the spoon and I pounded the bottom like 3 times. And then I raised it up kind of quickly to about a foot and a half off the bottom. And he shot up there and grabbed it. And it was a lot of fun just because it was like I figured out a way by stirring up some of that sediment on the bottom. Tim Jenny, he's a PK lure rep up in Canada. He's like the master of doing that and catching fish. But then there was another one that was really cool. And I had no idea. If I hadn't had a sonar, I would have never seen this fish coming. But I was jigging. And I was jigging kind of midway in the water column because there were rainbow trout kind of cruising through. And I saw this fish at about 5 feet and my lure was down at 15 feet. And so I ripped it hard twice and that fish went from 5 feet and shot down and hit. And I mean, you could see him just screaming down towards it and he smacked that thing and it was about a 22-inch rainbow trout. So it's just fun. You really have to kind of play with it. You have to see what the fish are doing, see what their mood is. But if you haven't been out and checked out pklure.com and picked up some PKs, you should definitely go out there and do that, just because I can tell you I've caught so many different species and lots of bigger fish.
I think we've given you a whole episode of reasons why to go check out our sponsor PK. We're still grateful they're on board, and I've used and caught fish with their stuff. I've caught master angler fish with their stuff, and so I'd get on there. I mean, Patrick, go back and listen to the rest of this episode if you're questioning which ones to buy and what colors. And sorry about your stock and inventory.
Yeah, I will tell you, man. And here's the ones going into ice fishing season. Get some flutter fish. Get the 1/4 and 1/2 ounce. You can catch pretty much anything on those, and the PK spoon as well. And then on the predators, get the 1/8 and 16th ounce predators, and get a few of those tungsten. I'm telling you, if you're fishing panfish, you're going to be very, very happy.
Leave a few red dot glows in stock for Patrick and I. We got burbot to kill.
Bought them up. But no, go out there and support them. They're a bunch of great guys. And, but yeah, it's a good thing to be thinking about. I'm excited for the fall. I'm excited for the fishing that's coming up. I can't wait.
Yeah, because all us hunters will be in the mountains leaving those bodies of water alone. So it's kind of like your own little, sanctuary, right?
Thank you. Yes. And I will be out there. That's for sure.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that wraps up another episode of RadCast Outdoors. See you on the next one.
Yeah, go to radcastoutdoors.com for more content. And of course, like, subscribe, and share with your friends, because we couldn't do this without you.